Thanks for tuning in to the Diaphragm Dynasty. I'm back with another R&B mystery, R&B lesson to, so to speak, to learn from, especially back in the days in the industry, back in the 90s and early 2000s when there wasn't a lot of information for artists to learn from or to live by, so to speak, because now we're in the information age, technology age, where a lot of things are made available through either documentaries or just through research of other people. So a lot of times in the world, they said a smart man learns from other people's mistakes and not his own. So this lesson is dedicated to or contributed to doing that, because thinking about D'Angelo's career, especially how he came onto the scene and what success he had and how it all transpired after that, was just a tall tale of how to properly address fame and things like that. And I'll get into that in just a little bit, but just a little background on D'Angelo: R&B singer, neo soul artist, very soulful, very skillful as well, especially vocally. One of the smoothest voices that we ever heard in R&B and music general. So, he had this debut album called Brown Sugar and the lead single called Brown Sugar as well. But he had the song Cruising as well, which was a cover of Smokey Robinson's Cruising. And then he had a song called Lady. Now, all of these songs were major songs on his debut album, and, it catapulted his career. But unfortunately, he had difficulty, after the success of this album and the next album, Voodoo, which ultimately sold more than Brown Sugar, which, he was so talented that people look forward to hearing his voice, and people gravitated to him. But, and he had so much promise. But, between that first album and Brown Sugar, it took 4 years to release Voodoo, which when he released Voodoo, he released a new song, or one of the singles, which had a very popular video. I'm not sure what the YouTube numbers on it. I should look that up, but I'm pretty sure it's something crazy. But the untitled "How Does It Feel" video, when there was a video of him just shirtless with him showing everything down to his Adonis belt, and he became very popular off of that. He became a sex symbol. And when he became this sex symbol, there was a lot of success that he wasn't familiar with, and a lot of success that he didn't, or popularity that he really didn't care for. Because to me, D'Angelo, of course, I don't know D'Angelo, but seeing D'Angelo as a person and the way he interacted with people, he didn't care for the spotlight. He didn't care for the glamour. He just wanted to do his music and get out the way. But he didn't realize what this video would have done, or will do once he released it, because I think he even made reference to, people used to say, "Oh, that's the naked man." So they didn't talk about his artistry, they talked about his appeal, which, he became very unpopular, he became very uh, frustrated with, because of his new status that he didn't want. And also, he started having legal trouble, and then he started having substance issues after that. So a lot of different things like went downhill after that video release, because he didn't want that new found fame. But there's two things, well, actually, there's a couple of things that this untitled video did for D'Angelo. Well, things that he should have been prepared for in any field, whether you are in music, or you're in sports, or you in, if you're working at the local gas station. There's a lot of two things that you always have to consider before making a decision, especially a decision like he did to make a video that would be to consider today as clickbait or viral, something that would go viral. The two things that you must consider. So the first thing is that the price of fame and success costs too much unless you are prepared for it. But even if you're prepared for it, sometimes you still might not get what you think you would have got, because sometimes sometimes it's overwhelming. Sometimes it reaches to status that you would never think it would reach. Um, and he was dealing with this pressure in a pre-internet era, where you got things through media outlets, not social media. You got things through the newspaper. You got things through talk shows and things like that. But you really didn't have to deal with memes and you didn't have to deal with shorts and reels and things like that. So just imagine if he went through this time like today, it would be exacerbated by hundreds of times than it was back in the era when he did it back in 2000 or 2001. So there's a lot to consider that, but that's always what you have to consider when you're making a decision, especially in a spotlight like that. What is going to be the blowback? Because we know the price of fame and price of success sometimes can be more than you can handle. Like you want the price of fame and success, but sometimes you don't always want what comes with it, and sometimes you're not prepared for it, or you're not apt to deal with that type of pressure or scrutiny. So that's one of the things that D'Angelo needed to consider that he didn't consider, and unfortunately, he wasn't prepared for it. But if you consider all the angles, you'll be prepared for what lies ahead. But there could be small situations where it could be bigger than that. But the second case um, is that no matter what field that you're in, like I talked about before, if you're working at the local gas station, all the way to you're working, being a president of the United States, one of the things that you have to worry about, and this is in the words of the famous hip hop producer Hit Boy, losing yourself will be your toughest loss. So D'Angelo probably did something that a video that his label wanted him to do because they had a stronghold back on artists back then because they had way more leverage than they do today. So I'm pretty sure his label wanted him to do the music video and wanted him to do it in that fashion to sell more records and sell, more singles and things like that. But at the end of the day, and I talked about this before, what makes you a man is not what you say yes to, but what you say no to. And if you know that that's not your personality, you don't want that look, then you have to tell people no. And always remember that losing yourself will be your toughest loss. So a lot of times we do things for money because we need it. We need to feed our families, but sometimes we lose ourselves in the process. And then you lose yourself in the process, you lose the purpose of everything that you're doing it for. Sometimes you have to make tough decisions that say, hey, I'm not going to do it this way. I can find a better way to do it. And when you find what that better way is, if the initial way isn't right, then everything else will figure itself out and you'll be a happier person for it. Because I believe when D'Angelo made this decision, and there's been a lot of reports saying this, that, mentally he wasn't there anymore. He took a huge hiatus off and started doing soundtracks and started doing um, just appearances on albums afterwards, and never really dropped a solo project again until probably around 2014 or something like that. And that was like a collab project. So there were a lot of things that steamrolls from this video and him making this decision because I'm pretty sure he was pressured from the label to do so. And being on a label back then was everything. So if you didn't, really wasn't a precedent for being independent. So he had to deal with that. But similar to Lauryn Hill's decision, to kind of step away from music, he had it's about leverage, and he didn't have that. Well, he had enough leverage, but he didn't have that Lauryn Hill type leverage where he could tell them no. But at the same time, you know, he had to make a tough decision, and he probably didn't expect it to down spiral like this. I remember watching Jamie Foxx show, and he made a spoof of it on his show, of him doing that same type of video with the fake braids and with the shirtless video and things like that. So it definitely became big in media, but luckily he didn't have to deal with social media and the pressures of today when everyone has access to comment and for you to see those comments and for your family members to see those comments because a lot of time those celebrities don't see the comments and they just get back to them from other people. So, but there's too many variables to consider. But the most important part is the human aspect when dealing with situations like this. So, um, as always, thanks for tuning in to the Diaphragm Dynasty. Until next time, I'll see you next time.